Today, we're going to look at grinders, specifically handheld grinders. We have various grinders in this shop that we're going to be using. We have pedestal grinders, pedestal wire wheel grinders, as well as these handhelds that we're going to be using today and most of the days in the welding class if you're trying to clean up your material within your welding booths. So because we got these grinders for you to grab and use, we're going to go through how to use them safely, how to change out the different heads that you're going to be using or attachments on the grinder, and as well as how to put them away properly. So you can see over here behind me we've got the grinders nicely wrapped up on the wall. We typically have up to 6 of them here for us, and you'll notice that the cables are nicely wrapped loosely around the brackets. So when we need a grinder, we can just grab it here. We can head into our welding booth, and inside of the welding booth there's an outlet in every one of them that you can plug in and use. When you're done with the grinder, you're going to bring it back, hang it on the wall, and then just nice loops put the cord around the bracket. What I do not want you doing when you're putting your grinder away is to wrap the cable around the grinder itself. Although it might be neater for storage purposes when you put it away, it is hard on the cable down here where we're making that tight bend. So for the longevity of the grinders, what I would prefer you do is to put the grinder on the wall and then with nice easy loops hang those loops up here. We tend to have some accessories for the grinders. Currently those accessories are kind of sitting in the trays here usually. Hopefully at some point we get some nice brackets up here for various tools and stuff. But for now, if you're looking for the wrenches or extra attachments for it, they're probably sitting in the little trays of the grinder itself. I've got some of them laid out today as we do our demonstration, and I do have a grinder here with a power cord brought over to the table so that we can actually turn it on and do some grinding today. So anytime you're making changes to that grinder, you want to make sure you are unplugged. And this is important because you're going to be in those welding booths, possibly alone, doing your own work. If you're changing out this disc here or doing any kind of work to this end, unplug your grinder. That is #1 safety protocol on most equipment. If you're doing changes, unplug the power. Because if you accidentally pull the trigger when you're doing something here, your hand is now the part that's touching that when it turns on. So you need to make sure that you're not plugged in when you're doing that. So we're going to plug it in. We're going to make a couple of grinds just to see what it looks like. Then we'll change some stuff out, and then we'll come back and turn it on again. So I've got a piece of random metal here. I'm going to go ahead and clamp it down to the table using one of our welding vise clamps so that part's not going to move on us. I'm going to go ahead and plug in the power. I've got my safety glasses on. And we have lots of different grinders in here. Most of them are the same brand. However, even though they might be different models, they might have different ways of turning them on. This particular one has a safety button right here, so you have to hold the safety in order to turn it on. So if I'm not holding that safety, it won't let me turn that on. And we have various styles here. For instance, this one right here has a side switch. So you push up and it can turn on, and down it turns off. This one's actually got a lock mechanism where it'll stay on, and all you have to do is press the button to shut it off. So this one's a little bit different. And it looks like that's the same style for the 4 that we have out here at this time. So again, we're going to pull the safety button, we're going to hold the trigger, and we have the grinder working. We got our safety glasses on. We're holding on to this device firmly as we're using it because there is torque. It is going to want to move a little bit in your hands, and you're keeping your fingers and stuff away from those moving components. So we come over to our material. We're going to get ready. The cord is not in the way of where it's going to be. We know that there's nobody in line of where we're sending sparks, and we're going to go ahead and do some grinding. And when we're done, we're just going to let it stop on its own. It is a common mistake for people to often, as it's spinning down, to run it on the table or run it on the material to slow it down, but that's not necessarily a safe thing for the grinders to do. You can probably do it a bunch of times, but in reality, this disc here is meant to run at full RPM, so if you're putting pressure on it at lower RPMs, it's not always good for that disc. So let it stop under its own power for that brake. And we've got some grinding, so maybe that's all we wanted to do. We're done. We can put the grinder away. We can pull our material. Now, anytime we're grinding, we're cutting, we're machining, we're welding, we're always producing heat, right? So this part could very well be hot to the touch. Who knows how much grinding we maybe did? It's probably not, because I didn't grind much. But we always want to be careful when we're coming up to something that could be hot and how we're touching it. So I always like to get close with the back of my fingers to feel any heat. If I don't feel any heat, I'm going to just tap the back of my fingers. If I don't feel any heat there, I'm going to rest the back of my fingers before I go to grab that part. Because if I'm going to burn something, and don't get me wrong, we never want to do that. That's not why we take shop classes, to get hurt. But if we are going to burn something, we don't want to burn our fingertips. We use those every day of our life for the rest of our life, and that's an area we don't want to hurt. So if we were to burn something, I'd rather it be the back of my fingers than my fingertips. Now, I hope that you never and I never burn myself, and by doing things like that to make sure we're coming up to stuff that's not hot before we grab it is going to prevent that from happening. Ultimately, by grabbing over here, you should be safe because the grinding was done over here as well. So if you're taking it out of the clamp and you're grabbing on this side of the material, it should be fine. So let's say we don't want to necessarily grind. We have all kinds of different attachments that we can put onto a grinder to do different things. What we have right here, first off, is just a standard grinding disc. They're pretty thick, like a 1/4 inch thick. It's basically glued up stone, essentially, and it's an aggressive grinding attachment. So this is going to take material off fairly quickly. If you messed up on a weld, if you need to bring material down, if you're trying to put an edge so you can do a fillet weld or a groove weld, this is going to allow you to take that material down. But if you're just trying to clean something up, maybe, we might be wanting to use a flap disc. And a flap disc, and this is a little bit of a used one, basically is a whole bunch of really heavy grit sandpaper glued together on a wheel. So this is not going to remove material quickly, but it is going to clean it up, shine it up, make it look good. So a flap disc also comes in very handy for also deburring parts to get the edges off of sharp things. So if we want to switch out from a grinder to a flap disc in this particular setup, this grinder requires a nut to hold it on for this particular attachment, so we need the wrench that's going to allow us to reach in to those holes. We also have a brake on the stop to do that, and before we do any of that work, we're going to unplug. So now that we have no power to the grinder, we can go ahead and hold the brake. So we're going to push in till it catches. So again, pushing in till it catches. Then it doesn't spin. I'm going to hold my finger there, and I'm going to come over here and loosen up that nut. And now that that nut is loose, I'm going to go ahead and take the nut off. And I don't want to lose this, so I'm going to set it down for now. I can take the disc off, which is not threaded, and the particular flap disc that we have right here does have a welded nut on it. So we will not need to put that nut back on because this one's just going to thread right back on. So again, I'm going to hold the brake till it catches. I'm going to put a little bit of force on there to make sure it's on, and I've got the flap disc attachment on now. Okay, I'm going to set my tooling aside so I don't lose it because it could very easily be misplaced somewhere. We're going to go ahead and plug back in. We're going to make sure this is on there and works. And then I'm going to go ahead and clamp down my material and demonstrate on here. So again, the cord is out of the way. and that would be using the flap disc. It's not going to take much material off, but it's going to make it look clean. One of the most common areas you need to do almost weekly or more in the welding booths is I'm going to be asking you to take the flap disc to your actual welding tables in the booths. So I want those welding tables to stay flat, and as you're welding on them, you're going to have welding spatter and debris and stuff caught and stuck on there. I don't necessarily want you taking the grinder and gouging into my table. Okay, we don't want to be aggressive on those tables in the welding booths unless you really messed up. You should be able to clean those welding booths up with just the flap disc. So once a week or more, you're going to come to your welding tables with the flap disc. And you're going to clean up that whole table. You don't have really big tables in there, so it shouldn't take that much. If you have a really bad area, maybe we've got to get a grinder out. But again, we don't want to have all kinds of divots and waves and stuff in those tables. So the flap disc is going to work really well for that process. All right, let's say we need to switch this out. So again, we're going to unplug. Making sure. Okay, we're going to hold that brake. Take that tool off, and let's say we put a cutting tool on. So this is a common mistake I see students making or rookies making, is a cutting wheel is very, very thin. All right, a cutting wheel is meant for cutting off material, not for grinding on the edges. A grinding wheel and a flap disc, you're using this surface right here to do the work. On a cutting wheel, you're using this surface to do the work, not the sidewall. It's not strong enough. It's a different composite, a different construction. It's not glued up stone anymore. It's more of a fibrous material, so we want to be coming in at the end of it. On most of these, you are going to need the nut again. You want to make sure that you're centered in there. Lock it down. Use the wrench to make sure that that is tight. We're spinning at high RPMs when we do this. And then I'm not going to demonstrate this necessarily because we rarely use a cutting wheel for welding one, but you would be coming in one of the directions and cutting straight at that material to cut it off. All right? There's a lot of other tools in this shop that we can cut stuff with, but this is not that common of a tool for us in here, especially in welding one. But if we really messed up somewhere and this has to come out, we can work together for that tool. The biggest thing I want to explain, this is not a grinding wheel. So we are not taking this wheel and doing this type of action with it. It's not going to hold up. All right, so again, we're still unplugged. The last attachment that we commonly use in here is a wire wheel. Our wire wheel has a welded nut on them, so we just have to hold the brake and spin those in. And we're ready to go with that one. So for a wire wheel, it's similar to a flap disc. It's going to be less aggressive than a flap disc. It's just going to kind of shine up your weld. So if you really want to see what's in there, a wire wheel will be a good job for that. But reality, it's just usually just for visual looks. It's not for the construction or project itself. So that is another attachment out of the 4 attachments that we can put onto a grinder. So I'm going to go back to the grinding attachment. I'm going to need the nut again. I'm putting the nut so that that little bump collar right there is down against the disc because it actually fits right inside of there. Helps keep everything nice and straight and centered. We're going to go ahead and plug in now, again with that tool in place. And I just have one last demonstration. So we've talked safety. You're holding on to this with both hands. You've got safety glasses on. Everybody around you has safety glasses on. You know that that's tight. You're keeping your hands and fingers away from those edges because if you come up here and bump this while it's running, that's not always, it's going to hurt. You're going to feel it. So you're keeping your hands down here and away from that. You're using the handle because it's going to torque a little bit. It's not horrendous, but it is definitely going to torque a little bit. And you're watching what you're doing. You're watching where the cord is and your material is clamped down. Now, this is one of the tools that a lot of people tend to be nervous around. And I understand that. You know, we got saws and welders and table saws and all kinds of equipment around here that people can be nervous or not nervous around. But this one causes sparks, and people tend to be nervous or uneasy around those sparks. They're afraid that the spark's going to hurt them or hurt somebody else because you're physically seeing what looks like fire coming out of the device. And I understand that, I really do. So some things to watch out for. Make sure you're not sending those sparks right into somebody else's face or in somebody else's work area. You can easily direct them depending on where you're cutting. So I'm going to start here and get some sparks, and you'll see with just a little bit of movement, I can direct where I'm sending those sparks. So if I got somebody working at the table right here, I can make sure I'm sending them away from that person. So you as the operator do have control of where you're sending stuff on this particular tool, and I think that's an important thing. But the other side of that, and I'm not saying don't be afraid of it, don't think it can't hurt you, because sparks will or can hurt. If you get a big one, or if it goes in the wrong place, like under your shoe and your sock or something, you'll definitely feel a little bit. But for the most part, the sparks are not something you need to like take a mile walk out of your way around the shop just because you don't want to walk by the sparks. So I'm going to go ahead and get some sparks going. Now I'm going to get my hand and my arm right in the line of that to show, yeah, I'm going to feel them a little bit, right? Probably should have long sleeves on as you're working out here. But again, it's not something that you really need to go completely out of your way because somebody's got sparks. So it's not that I'm encouraging you to do that, but I just want to show a little bit that for the most part, they look more dangerous than they are. Again, it is fire flying across in small little pieces of stone and metal that's going out there, yes, but for the most part, it really is just small particles. So as long as you got the safety glasses on, as long as you got the proper PPE on, you know, if you're walking through somebody's path with sparks, so be it. If somebody accidentally hits you with some sparks, you're going to be fine. You just got to keep an eye on some of that stuff of where you are. So when we're done with this particular setup, again, a reminder that we're going to hang up the tools over here. We're going to wrap up the cords nice and loose because we might have 20-some students out here any given day working, and we got 6 grinders, right now 4 out here. People are going to be wanting to borrow those back and forth into those welding booths, so make sure you are picking up your stuff. Also beware, this part's definitely going to be warm right now because I just did a whole lot of grinding on that. And if you're grinding near the table might even be warm. So just be conscious of some of those things that are going on that other people might not know. If you walked away from this hot piece of metal, somebody else might walk up, not know anything, and grab it and hurt themselves. So always be cognizant of your own mess in your own area as you're moving things around. All right. So that was the demonstration of handheld grinders today. We've talked about how to use them, how to put them away. We've talked about the different attachments, their purposes, and how to set them up onto the grinder, because you'll be doing that yourself as you need those different attachments in your welding booths. We've also talked about some general safety operation of that handheld grinder on the table, how to keep yourself safe, and how to be careful of that heat. And finally, we wrapped up a little bit of talk about those sparks and some of the concerns you may or may not have with those. I'm excited to get you in the shop so you can actually use these tools, and hopefully this video has helped you with a better understanding of handheld grinders.